Koko Networks, a clean cooking startup, Kenya has opened a new legal battle with the World Bank over 23 billion Kenya shillings in compensation to Koko. The company failed to receive the letter of authorization from the Kenyan government to sell carbon credits. Now, this has affected up to 1.5 million households across Kenya who relied on Koko's ethanol fuel as a cheaper, cleaner alternative to charcoal and kerosene. Now, tonight, Stanley Nyarengita breaks down what carbon credits are and why they are essential to saving the planet. Stanley?
Thank you very much, Shiksha Arora. And definitely, it is one of those questions that so many people are asking themselves online. What is a carbon credit? And just really trying to understand what a carbon credit really is. But before we get into the meat of what a carbon credit is, what are greenhouse gases? That is where the big question always starts, because it is always on the atmosphere. So greenhouse gases include a variety of gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So this methane is where the big conversation of the Koko Networks actually starts. Now, these particular greenhouse gases all trap in the atmosphere, and that is how they cause negative impacts to the climate. For example, floods, drought, and we'll be taking a look at a number of stories on that. Now that you understand that, what are carbon credits? Simply put, carbon credit is a certificate that basically represents 1 ton, that is 1,000 kg, of carbon dioxide either removed or avoided. It was proposed in the climate negotiations as a way to basically reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Let me explain it to you in a very layman's term. So basically, a company will be using this carbon credit, which is like a permission to pollute the environment, so that another company which is doing the reverse of that, which is making sure that the environment is clean, is going to replace what it is doing. So it is going to be buying that. And this is basically what is referred to as carbon offsetting, where when you talk about carbon offsetting, it is the reduction or removal of emissions of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases made in order to compensate for the emissions made elsewhere. So now, these are particular examples that if you actually want to get into a carbon credit project, because for you to actually now get into the wholesale and buying of these carbon credits, you need a carbon project. Now, these are some of the areas: energy, transport, agriculture, forestry, and land use, which is actually the most common one, industrial processes and product use, and waste. This is according to climate change, that particular law for climate change, carbon markets regulations 2024. Now, it says that a project proponent who wishes to engage in a carbon project shall apply to the designated national authority for approval of the carbon project, which in this case is the National Environment Management Authority. Now that you understand how to actually get into this particular carbon projects, even as you're going to be diving deep into that particular law, how much do you need? That is where the rubber meets the road on this. So this is, first of all, the application fees. 10,000 Kenyan shillings if you're a citizen, but if you're a non-citizen, you need 100,000 Kenyan shillings. Now for the document fees, you're going to prepare yourself for this particular amount of money. As citizen, you're going to need 100,000 Kenyan shillings, and then for non-citizen, 200,000 Kenyan shillings. But key to note, NEMA says that this particular fees always vary when it comes to the pricing of this at the end of the day. Now, the fact that you have this particular amount of money and you have decided which carbon project that you're going to be having, now let's see which administrative fee. Now, this particular administrative fee is has actually been set there so that you know that when you have a carbon project with projected annual issuance of 15,000 carbon credits per annum or less, it shall be capped at 150,000 Kenyan shillings. And then that is going to be doubling up for when you have more than 15,000 carbon credits per annum. So it is very, very important to know that when you have your carbon project, this is the amount of money, and you're also just taking a look at how it is going to be priced. But let's take a look at, even for Kenya and other African countries, how are we doing? We're actually pretty good. At number 2, 11 million carbon credits issued as of 2022. This is data according to the World Bank. Starting at number 1, DRC at 24 million, and then you can take a look at other countries, including Zambia, Uganda, Malawi, Nigeria, Tanzania, Ghana, South Africa, Burundi, and the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. 5 million carbon credit issued by 2022. But then the biggest question you ask yourself, so the fact that I know all this, at the end of the day, how is it priced? Yes. So let's now tell you how they're going to be priced, depending again on the different carbon projects. I told you forestry and land use is one of the most common ones, and it is $6, between $6 and $24 per credit. And this particular amount of money always varies as well. And then waste management, $4 and $12 per credit. This is according to World Bank 2021. Let's take a look at also how they're even traded from countries, from regions as well, and to different countries. Now, there are two types of this particular carbon markets, even as you're going to be getting into it, and it's very important to know which particular one you'll be getting into it. Voluntary carbon markets, and then there's a compliance carbon markets. So these are particular examples of the international standards that you really need to adhere to. So first off, you have these. Yes, so actually, even before we get into the international standards, we'll be getting into that later to the next one. It is very important to know that that particular carbon project that you had, yes, here they are. So there's the Vera, there's a gold standard, and then Plan Vivo. So now back to that graphic that was there earlier. The carbon project that you have, it is very key to note that once you have sold it, it will, first of all, it is issued a unique identifier and registered by either of those three that you had seen earlier. And then this particular certificate, once it is purchased, removed a company, it must be retired so that you avoid having that particular carbon credit being used over and over and over. Now, to actually really understand this particular conversation even better, let's speak to one of a climate expert all the way from Greenpeace Africa.
Carbon credits are often presented as a win-win solution to climate change. The idea is simple. If a company or country pollutes too much, it can pay for a carbon credit that supposedly cancels out these emissions, usually by funding projects like tree planting or forest protection somewhere else, often in Africa. On paper, this sounds smart. In reality, it's deeply, deeply flawed. Firstly, carbon credits don't actually reduce global emissions. They allow major polluters, mostly in the global north, to keep burning fossil fuels while claiming to be carbon neutral. Instead of cutting pollution at the source, carbon credits shift responsibilities onto poorer countries that contribute the least to the climate crisis. Secondly, many carbon credit projects in Africa failed to deliver what they promised. Forests, protected on paper, are still logged, burned, or degraded. Thirdly, carbon markets often harm local communities. Land use for carbon offset projects can restrict indigenous people and farmers from accessing forests, grazing land, or water they've relied on for generations. Profits usually flow to foreign companies and brokers, while local people receive little compensation and lose control of their land. Lastly, carbon credits lock Africa into a low-value role in the global economy. Instead of supporting industrialization, clean energy, and climate-reliant development, they encourage Africa to remain a carbon sink for richer nations, absorbing pollution rather than building prosperity. Africa does not need carbon credits. It needs climate finance that is fair, direct, and unconditional. Investments in renewable energy, a resilient agriculture, infrastructure, and adoption led by Africans themselves. At Greenpeace Africa, we maintain that the climate crisis was not caused or exacerbated by countries in the global south, and it won't be solved by turning the continent of Africa into a carbon offset for the rest of the world.
Right, and that is on her thoughts. We'll definitely be having this conversation right here on Green Fix, just to help you understand what carbon credits are and how they are very essential to you. Shiksha, back to you.
All right, thank you very much for that, Stan. Of course, quite an insightful piece right there. And this conversation is something that I keep hearing over and over again. Carbon credits, what exactly is it? So I'm glad that will definitely clear a few things out for you and just give you, a better picture on what exactly carbon credits are, what they do, what the importance is, and of course, sometimes why exactly is the future, the world leaning towards carbon credits. Anyways, moving